Rachel, and today I'm going to talk to you about Making of Biblical Womanhood, How the Subjugation of Women Became Gospel Truth by Beth Allison Barr. Sorry if this cover is like absolutely gone to shit. This is an ARC that I received from the publisher a long ass time ago. By a long ass time ago, I mean, I want to say a year, maybe 11 months ago. I requested this very specifically because this was on my list of most anticipated nonfictions for 2021. Did I make such a list for 2022? No. Ambition? I don't know her. Organization? Who? Let me sign into my computer and get my little notes. The little notes. Potay. Oh boy. Wow, I have a lot more notes than I remember writing down. Oh my god. This book took me about a year to finish. As I said, I requested an ARC. I was so excited to be approved. I was so excited to get it in the mail. I immediately cracked it open. When I got the book, however, and I proceeded to read just the introduction, it quickly revealed itself to be not exactly what I was looking for. I want to explain though that this is not a bad book. It's that depending on where you are in your beliefs, in your deconstruction of beliefs, if you grew up in fundamentalism and are deconstructing, this will be a different experience for everybody. But it was not what I had been anticipating, and my expectations were quite high. I was expecting somebody, Beth Allison Barr, to have been somebody who was on the same page as me. I don't know why I thought that, but that is what I thought, and that's not quite what I got. I'm not saying she's a bad person, I'm just saying that we have very different beliefs, very different places we're at in life. With evangelicalism, I am now an agnostic, having grown up evangelical. Beth is still an evangelical, but takes a more feminist approach to evangelicalism. Oh, I've done this before, haven't I? Other reviews, if you go look this book up on Goodreads, other reviews have pointed out that this book is not exactly how it's proposed. It doesn't exactly read that way. So it says, a trusted historian shows that biblical womanhood isn't biblical, but was born in a clearly definable historical moment and presents a better way forward for the contemporary church. First of all, I disagree with the last part. I don't think that she really does do a good job of presenting a new way forward. I think she does a better job of just sort of like making commentary on the current state of things and then saying, Jesus said women are free, so let them be free. I don't think she really succeeded in that second part, but the first part, yes, she is a historian. She does talk about certain moments in which Christianity developed certain ideas. However, she does also talk about her own experiences that led her to having a sort of deconstruction of ideas. Very like misogynistic things happened to her. Some have called it part historical discussion, part memoir. I can see that, yeah. Many were unhappy with this. I don't necessarily think that that is a bad formula for writing a book. I don't have a problem with joining those two things together. I think that the author's experiences have value as well as her knowledge as a historian has value, but I have a problem with the particular execution of this book because I think that I found the particular way that the author talks about things to be very disjointed and similar to, I'm not talking about the issues I've had with Lauren Huff, but Lauren Huff in her book, I felt sort of failed to make a sort of like went around whatever point she was trying to make rather than concisely making it, and I had a similar reading experience with this book. The introduction talks about the absolute nemesis of my life, Dr. James fucking Dobson, who I actually loathe with a passion. Dr. James Dobson is responsible for a lot of personal trauma of mine, and I despise him. It's hilarious because he literally shows up in the second paragraph of the introduction, which if you know anything about fundy culture, that tracks, because if anybody is pushing biblical womanhood at women, it is absolutely Dr. fucking James Dobson, the guy that beats his own dog. Literally, look it up. I have yelled about him multiple times on this channel before. If you know me, you know I hate him. She talks about how his views are preached everywhere in fundy culture. That is accurate. She says that she subscribed to these views until one day she didn't. Yeah, same. Her and her husband were asked to leave their home church, and this was very devastating for them and their family because they were very established there, but something very sexist happened, and they tried to talk to the church leaders about it, and they said, no, you gotta go. She started to believe that women had equal footing as men and should be allowed to have equal footing in the church, which is is called egalitarianism. Not just in the church, but in general, egalitarianism means that women and men should be on equal footing. The opposite to this is called complementarianism. Why is it called complementarianism? Because women are supposed to be a complement to men and vice versa, but more so, women are supposed to be a complement to men. We're supposed to be complementary to them. Men are supposed to be in charge, and women are supposed to be separate but equal, but still subjugated. God, this book is actually literally falling apart. Like like, I've had it so long and have been reading it and dissecting it and going over it so long that like the enamel is peeling off. Whatever this is called, it's peeling off. It's pretty bad. This poor arc has just been. And it doesn't help that my kid got a hold of it and like fucking colored all over it. The author puts complementarianism as women are divinely created as helpers and men are divinely created as leaders, is what she said on page 5, which, yeah, that's how they frame it. Of course, women are supposed to be like subjugated. We're like barely a step above children. She says that biblical womanhood is based on a certain interpretation of Bible verses that leave out historical and cultural context of the times in which they were written, and that there is a conversation to be had about biblical inerrancy and translations like the KJV. However, then she brings up the first thing that her and I disagreed on. She says the reason that humans do this complementarianism bullshit is because of sinful human drive. Ugh, Beth. No. No. That almost feels like a cop-out, which is something that, nothing against her, she kind of subscribes to, that I've seen her do multiple times. I'll get there, but I feel like that's a cop-out because it's almost like saying, it's inerrant, and you know, oh shucks, that old sinful drive that we just all have. It's like, I don't think so. If humans are created equal, which she agrees with, then we would see women trying to dominate as much as men at the same rate that we see men doing so. I would argue it's not sin nature, which I don't believe in anymore, being agnostic. I would argue that it's cultural. Men and women do this to a certain extent, but not to the degree that men do. Why? Because men are encouraged to do it. I don't think it has anything to do with sin or the devil, as she also claims. I think it's really telling that it's not really like a human issue and a sin nature issue, but like definitely more of a men's issue. There's a hair. There it is. It's definitely more of a men's issue, and you can see this just by looking at the reviews of this book. Men are really put off by this book, whereas women are far less put off. Why? If it's a sin thing, wouldn't it be equally so? I think there's a conversation to be had there. Chapter 1, she talks about pagan patriarchy. So, non-Christian patriarchy. She talks about historical examples of this, such as like Aristotle believing that women are less deformed men, like not as well formed, and therefore are able to be subjugated. And she tries to establish a link between secular patriarchy and Christian patriarchy. She also says this on page 19 that I took issue with. Wow, I didn't realize how many tabs are on this. Holy shit. I had a lot of things to say. The claim is certainly that women's work, from housework to childcare to answering phones, is valuable and worthy, but when that same work is deemed unsuitable for a man to do, it reveals the truth: women's work is less important than men's. Moreover, just as men are demeaned for doing women's jobs, which often come with less authority and consequently lower pay, women are restricted from doing men's jobs, which both garner more authority and higher pay. Wait, what did I have an issue with here? I feel like this leaves out the historical context of like how we transferred from feudalism to capitalism, which she does like multiple times leave that out of this book. And I feel like leaving this out does a disservice to how exactly this became seen as women's work, which is very important to understand why women are subjugated. Just in a general sense, she does not take an anti-capitalist approach, which I feel if you don't take an anti-capitalist approach, even in like a theoretical sense, even if you don't agree with anti-capitalism, you are missing a lot of points. She brings up the human sin thing again on 29. Hold on. The first human sin built the first human powered hierarchy. I really just wrote disagree. Patriarchy wasn't what God wanted. Patriarchy was a result of human sin. I don't think we can speculate on exactly what God wanted, personally. That's just my thing. Patriarchy was a result of the fall, mere accommodation to the reality of the times and culture. It was not a reflection of the divine ideal for humanity. Patriarchy is created by people, not ordained by God. But in a way, you could say that it was because of what happened with Adam and Eve. Not that I even think that that story is real. But yeah, like I can understand why people who believe in biblical inerrancy think that women should be subjugated because of Eve, you know, eating the apple and leading Adam astray. So her idea is that, oh, you know, this happened because Christianity just wanted to look like secular society, and, you know, because of human sin. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I think that for a long time Christians have craved power. So sorry. She does make a great point about how verses are used out of historical context to justify racism and slavery. While patriarchy defines the bounds of women's lives, it also defines subjugated peoples and races as the others to be dominated. Patriarchy walks with structural racism and systemic oppression, and it has done so consistently throughout history. When we rightly understand that biblical passages discussing slavery must be framed within their historical context, and that through the lens of this historical context we can better see slavery as an ungodly system that stands contrary to the gospel of Christ, how can we then not apply the same standards to biblical texts about women? Which, yeah, I agree, but at the time of Adam and Eve, if you believe in biblical inerrancy, there was no culture. It was just Adam and Eve, and God was like, hey, she's under you because she came from your rib. So like, what culture is there? None. So I can understand why complementarianisms are like, no, it was Adam and Eve, and they set the tone for how it is because of the fall, and men are always above women. So like, I don't think she addressed that properly in this book, which that sucks. And I found this like book, parts of it, to be confusing because she would vacillate between saying patriarchy was born out of sinful human nature, and then it was born out of human civilization, created and maintained because civilization values men's bodies more. So like, which one is it? Is it the sin nature or is it the value of labor? Then she makes a great point about the Bible having many passages which are subverting what are seen as like typical traditional gender roles, but then says that Christianity is supposed to be different from the rest of humanity and therefore different from the rest of human history because Jesus makes men and women free and therefore and equal, so which I feel like is a way of monopolizing freedom under Christianity, which is something that Christians, I just got into it with a few of them last weekend in my own family because I feel like that's a thing that they do and I don't appreciate that. I have freedom as an agnostic person because that's my inherent right as a person. The systems in place that I deal with sexism in are both Christian and non-Christian, and I can find freedom in some sects of Christianity, but I can also find freedom in non-Christian places as well. Chapter 2 is called What If Biblical Womanhood Doesn't Come from Paul? This is the chapter that I was the most disappointed by because it's the chapter that I had the highest hopes for. So Paul is used more than any other person in the Bible to justify misogyny. Alright, on page 39, this is such a short book and yet I have underlined like so freaking much of it's ridiculous. Paul has been used against women as they have been told to be silent in 1 Corinthians 14, to submit to their husbands in Ephesians 5, not to exercise or teach authority over men in 1 Timothy 2, and to be workers at home in Titus 2. So yeah, Paul's kind of seen as a dick, right? She claims that modern evangelicals are looking at Paul through a modern lens rather than using cultural and historical context to know how Paul really wanted to be understood. She claims that Paul was trying to be countercultural to the Romans as he was living under Roman rule at the time, and the Romans hated Christians. And so he was trying to find a way to still live out Christian values and how to tell others to live out Christian values but still live under Roman rule. And it wasn't really about him being misogynistic, which the way she wrote it I was like, meh, maybe, sort of, I guess. Yeah, I guess I could kind of see it, maybe. I wasn't like fully convinced like, wow, this is amazing, I have to tell every Christian, they're gonna be so excited that I figured out Paul. And then she's making the case after this that Paul refers to himself, Paul can't be misogynistic because Paul refers to himself as a mother, a pregnant mother, a nursing mother, which great for those people and those women, but I feel like it elevates maternity to womanhood and like makes them interchangeable. And it's like, okay, so we have elevated the status of motherhood to the same status as manhood maybe, but not womanhood. Paul didn't say I'm as good as a woman. The status that he elevated was motherhood, not womanhood. And not every woman is a mother. So like, Is every woman supposed to relate to that? But only if she's had a kid? To boil down womanhood to only motherhood is to undermine and leave out the myriad of ways of being a woman and to exist as a woman. And Paul only seemed to have taken the time to elevate this one singular thing. And I wish that Beth had explored that and I wish that Beth had acknowledged that and not just acknowledged it, but explored why. She continues to make the case that Christians in Rome were trying to be egalitarian, I guess, and that was unacceptable to the Romans. And I can see from the excerpts that she provides that definitely women were seen as less than, and Christianity was seen as gross and unwanted. I don't think she adequately made the connection that I assume she was trying to make, that Christianity was deemed unacceptable because Christians treated women better. I don't see that connection. Maybe I misunderstood what she was trying to do, but that's, again, I found the book very disjointed and I always felt like she was sort of circling the point and never really making it. If that's the point she was trying to make, I don't think she adequately made it. I did like in this chapter that she talks about women in the Bible who were doing the Lord's work, so to speak, and how some translations of the Bible have led to a intentional downplaying of their roles. Phoebe, for example, is said to be a deaconess, yet some biblical translations demote her to servant instead of calling her deaconess. She actually goes on to expand on this in chapter 3. She talks about women in the medieval era who were pivotal to Christianity and Christian history, such as the martyr Saint Margaret and Saint Paula, who founded a monastery and helped to translate the Vulgate. I don't know if it's actually called Vulgate. I know very little about Christian history because evangelical fundamentalist churches don't teach that to children. They just teach nonsense. And then there was a whole section on the preaching done by Mary Magdalene, which I found to be very, very well written, and I was really interested in that. But then right at the end of this, she talks about a lecture she gave, and I was so disappointed by this. This is gonna seem small to everybody else, but like this was something I was really disappointed by. She talked about a lecture that she gave on the subject of women in the early church, and she says, after finishing a lecture on women in the church, a lecture whose audience included both academics and church members, a pastor stopped me. Why don't they teach us this in seminary? He asked. I have never learned any of this. Same, bro. I told him I didn't know, but that wasn't true. I do know. I think it may be for the same reason that the medieval church pushed women out of leadership to protect and enhance the authority of men. And I really wish that she would have dived in right there to the part where she said, but that wasn't true, I do know. Okay, why don't you want to explain? Why don't you want to explain why you do know the answer but you don't want to talk about it? My assumption is it's because it is exhausting to explain to men as a woman the ways in which we are both historically and presently treated as less than. That would have been such a good discussion for this book, and imagine if she had had that conversation with a pastor, what that could have done for this book. Such a missed opportunity. In chapter 4, she talks about the Reformation as being pivotal, a pivotal time that she says hardened the theology of gender for women, but I disagree. I think she fails, again, I'm gonna be anti-capitalist here. I think she fails to see the ways in which capitalism and Christianity have worked in tandem to subjugate people, particularly women and people of color. The Reformation was in like 1500 to 1600. In Caliban and the Witch, Sylvia Federici talks about how reproductive labor became seen as women's work after the Black Plague in 1350. I do have a discussion about Sylvia Federici's Caliban and the Witch with my friends Lo and Knox. I'll link it down below if you're interested. In general, I wish that the author would have done more to discuss Christianity's inextricable links to capitalism and how that has been used to demean the existence and labor of women and people of color. I really appreciated this part in chapter 4 though, where she talks about after the Reformation. I'll get there. Glorifying the past just because we like the story better isn't history, it is propaganda, which with everything that we're seeing right now with book bannings, I would be really interested to see her perspective on that since, you know, she's a historian. I'd be interested in seeing particularly her opinions on the whitewashing of history and the glorification of that. She tries to do this a bit in chapter 5 with translations of the Bible being written in in a way that excluded the importance of women, and says that while previously gender-inclusive language had been used, translations have become more and more gendered. And now modern evangelicals denounce gender-inclusive language as a dangerous product of feminism. Yes, so dangerous to be equal. But then she makes this case that certain translations capitulate to the cultures that they live within, but says that while one translation will capitulate to the non-Christian culture of feminism, another will capitulate to the non-Christian culture of patriarchy, which I feel like ignores the actual definition of the word culture. Christian patriarchy may not be what Jesus wanted, in your opinion, but that does not mean that a culture of Christian patriarchy doesn't exist and only a non-Christian culture of patriarchy does exist. Whether or not you think patriarchy is theologically sound is one thing. Whether or not you think Christian patriarchal culture exists and has existed and has been cultivated for a long time is another thing. I think her wording is weird at best and wrong at worst. However, there's a great part after this where she explains the mistranslations in KJV. Early English Bible translations did not actually reflect Hebrew words or relationships, can you shut up? But instead reflected early modern English sensibilities. Women became wives in English Bible translations even when they would not have been considered wives in the biblical world. The word marriage never appears in the Hebrew text. Neither the word marriage nor the word wife appear in the Hebrew text. The KJV was not the first translation to infer marriage from, there's a part in Genesis 2:22 through 24 where she talks about the English Bible sanctifying marriage. But the normalcy of these words for the early modern readers made marriage in the Old Testament world seem very similar to marriage in 17th century England. The English Bible translated more than Hebrew texts. It also translated early modern English ideas about marriage into biblical texts, as well as falsely universal language that excluded women. I thought that that was really fascinating, and I'm really glad that she included that. In chapter 6, there's a great part on purity culture, which, whoop, did that do a number on many of us, huh? And so-called modesty. Oh, I have so many thoughts on modesty. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see her explicitly state that this developed alongside narratives of imperialism and racism. But once again, she disappointed me. She talks about purity lessons in the past, and I wish that she would have bridged the gap between past and a little bit more present, because when you do that, you can see how things are, playing out similarly today. So the purity lessons for 19th century working class women were harder. Those suspected of sexual immorality or even considered high risk for committing a sexually immoral act could be rounded up for rehabilitation in Magdalene homes. There they were taught to be modest, silent, hardworking, and subservient through religious indoctrination and training in domestic duties. Purity culture thus shamed women in the 19th century as it continues to shame women today. So she tried to bridge the gap there, but I feel like if you're going to talk about Magdalene homes, you need to talk about... Where's my book? Where is it? Fuck, I can't find it. Here we are. Hello, my baby. The Girls Who Went Away by Ann Fessler, which talks about... Wow, that's a lot of dust. Can you tell I haven't read it in a while? Another one that got underlined to all hell. The Girls Who Went Away by Ann Fessler talks about how Catholic and Christian churches worked in tandem with the culture at the time to send away girls in the United States to these homes, where 500,000 women who were sent to homes that mirrored Magdalene homes. And many of these women are still alive today, and they're only in like their 60s and 70s. Religious leaders in their communities worked in tandem with the culture to send these girls away so that they would be taught more purity. Because they got pregnant out of wedlock, and they were like, you have to go away because you're a bad example and you need to relearn things, you need to be indoctrinated. Then they'd have their babies taken away from them, and then they were shoved back into their lives and just expected to act like none of it ever happened. Why would you not bring that up here? Like, as a historian, that is such an important piece of US history that we are not taught at all. That has to do so much with religion, particularly Christianity, and how Christians in the culture at the time worked to subjugate women, young women, and teach them purity and force them into these homes. If you're gonna bring up Magdalene homes, why would you not bring that up? Okay, we're almost done here. Just a couple more notes. She takes time to talk about women's wages in the Industrial Revolution, which was great. But I wish that she had taken, again, the approach of examining capitalism. Capitalism was built with the subjugation of women in mind. It is inextricably linked to gender inequality. I wish that she had discussed how work at home and the mental load of that is work. It is put off onto majority women. It is seen as obligatory unpaid labor for women and for women only. And capitalism devalues that labor and therefore will continue to devalue women. But she does take aim at James Dobson again, which I award her all of the brownie points for, explaining how his teachings preach 19th century values regarding the status of women to current generations, which she calls unbiblical, and calls his work the sanctification of the cult of domesticity, which, oh, what a scathing take. Oh my god, just eviscerate him. In chapter 7, she says something that I really disagreed with. And it just really boils down to me being agnostic and a feminist and her being still an evangelical and a feminist. So she says, it's on 173. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing Christians that oppression is godly, that God ordained some people simply because of their sex or skin color or both as belonging under the power of other people, that women's subordination is central to the gospel of Christ. I agree that Christians do think that. I don't think that they think that because of the devil. And of course, I don't believe in the devil anymore. I am an agnostic. It is very freeing not to believe in the devil anymore. But I feel like this is, again, a cop-out. Again, I want to bring up that this is a pattern of hers. Recently, she retweeted that there's going to be a talk at Baylor College. She does teach at Baylor College. She is a professor there, and she retweeted this thing where they're having a talk about racial reconciliation. And I feel like, and the tweet said that racism is not a political issue, it is a gospel issue. And I take issue with that. I am not saying that it can't be a gospel issue. Why can't it be both is my thing. And if you are going to ignore how Christianity works in tandem with politics, you are going to leave out a myriad of issues and never address them. Also, Bethany from Beautifully Bookish Bethany, who also reviewed this book down the way, reviewed this book by the way, I'll leave her video down below. It's like a 3-book review. It's a really good video and I recommend you go check it out. I talked about this on Twitter, and she said that she feels like saying reconciliation, racial reconciliation, is a way to avoid talking about what we really need to do, which is racial reparations, which I fully agree with. Let's see, on 176, she said something. My note just says 176, so I don't know what past Rachel's talking about. Oh, she said many evangelicals believe that supporting women in ministry is a slippery slope leading to liberalism and agnosticism, which is hilarious because I'd ignore that not supporting women leads to agnosticism. I think I'm proof of that, but that is very subjective. On 186, she said something. All my note says is 186, intersectionality, which I don't know what I'm talking about. Race. Oh, she's talking about racism here. She said, Jamar Tisby accurately writes, racism never goes away, it just adapts. The same is true of patriarchy. Like racism, patriarchy is a shapeshifter, conforming to each new era, looking as if it has always belonged. The 18th and 19th centuries emphasized women's distinctiveness for men and used this distinctiveness to justify women's subordination, which I think that's a really good note. It's a really quotable part of the book. I just wish that she had taken the opportunity there to jump off and talk about intersectionality, but I'm not sure that she knows what that is, so that kind of sucks. She then talks about the debate over biblical inerrancy, whether or not you believe that the Bible is inerrant, not error, has no errors or does have errors, which I don't personally feel the need to talk about here beyond mentioning that I did see some Goodreads reviews who were men who were upsetty spaghetti over that, which is hilarious to me. But she does make this point worth noting on 189. The early 20th century emphasis on inerrancy went hand in hand with a wide-ranging attempt to build up the authority of male preachers at the expense of women. The concept of inerrancy made it increasingly difficult to argue against a plain and literal interpretation of women be silent and women shall not teach. So if you believe in a plain and literal interpretation of scripture without taking into, cultural context and all that shit, then yeah, sure, you can just take it at its word. But if you don't believe in then you start down the slope towards like biblical inerrancy, and yeah, so it's an interesting conversation worth having, and it certainly makes evangelical fundamentalists upset, particularly men who want to continue to subjugate women and children. I think that it's really important to remember while reading this book that this book does not take a look at issues globally. Angela Davis teaches in her book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, that individualism is bullshit and everything is interconnected. That means that in order to understand our experiences, we have to look globally. And I feel like this author really focused on the United States far too much. And I understand that like that's her bread and butter as far as like, you know, her experience as an evangelical, but I feel like she missed out on a lot of opportunity to have a further conversation about biblical womanhood as it exists outside of the United States. Globally, like both historically and presently. And in general, I just felt like this book was kind of disjointed. I wish that it had been a little bit better. Again, I don't think that this was a bad book. I just don't think it did what it set out to do. It didn't do what I was hoping. I don't agree with some of the ideas presented. That being said, it's still a wealth of information. I learned quite a bit more in this book than I learned in my Fundy evangelical history classes, which isn't saying much about the 4 different Fundy schools I went to. That tracks. I've talked about that in another video too. Have you heard of Rebecca? I sure have. So let me end on, who is this book for? It wasn't for me, but it might be for you. If you are still a Christian, let me put my laptop down. I think this book is for my mom. This book is for people like my mom, who recently I had a conversation about my mom where she is deconstructing, as she actually said, which was weird for me, deconstructing certain harmful ideas that she had been taught about women. And I think that this is particularly for evangelical women who are still in some degree of Fundyland, who are questioning biblical inerrancy, who are questioning the history that they've been taught, who want and have a desire to know more about the culture and the time and the historical context in which the Bible was written, who want to have a better understanding of Paul, who want to maybe take a different look at a different perspective from a woman who goes to a different church from them, who has had different experiences from them. I think that this book is like actually perfect for my mom, and I'm going to give it to her even though it's fucking falling apart. And I start taking my tabs off now. Some of these just say stuff like Aristotle sucks and The Point and 16th century. I've been reading this for so long, the tabs are basically useless at this point. So I think that this book is great for women who grew up or, you know, raised their children believing in the teachings of James Dobson, but now are kind of questioning, like, you know, the stance of where they stood before as far as, you know, women's value in the church. Evangelical women who are questioning their place and the place that they have put their children and other women. I think that this book has a lot of value. I just don't think that it was the right book for me at this point in my deconstruction. Maybe if I had read it years ago, I would have found a little bit more value out of it. I would have had a better reading experience. Unfortunately, I'm past that point in my life, so it wasn't for me, but that's okay. That doesn't mean it's a bad book. I think that structurally it could have used a little bit more work, but that is okay. I am still taking tabs off. What the frick? So I don't know that my audience has any evangelical women, but if you know of an evangelical woman in your life who is starting to believe different things about biblical womanhood, and you want to start that conversation with her, this might be a good book to pick up. Or if you're just interested in a evangelical who is, you know, learning more about her own feminist beliefs, but isn't necessarily taking an anti-capitalist approach, this might be for you. If you are not anti-capitalist, this might be for you. So this book is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but that is okay. And I'm glad that I read it. I'm glad that I read it, and I'm glad that I'm really thankful to the publisher for sending me an ARC, and I'm going to pass this along to somebody who's going to get more out of it. And I hope that my review was helpful for somebody. It certainly was helpful for me to sit down and have this little chat with y'all. I have pasta waiting for me, so I'm gonna go. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the work I do here, I have a Ko-fi account linked below if you want to donate to my channel. Like and subscribe, leave all of your thoughts and feelings down below. If you were taught any James Dobson bullshit, please tell me how you feel about it now versus how you feel when you were taught about it. If your parents still have James Dobson books on their bookshelf, let me know, because mine sure do. Well, my mom and her husband, my dad doesn't read. Alright, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.